Добрий день. Oh, here we go. Okay. Добрий день, шановні колеги. I think we can, is it better to wear the headphones? How does this work? This is my first time doing one of these with the headphones, but as long as you can hear me, it should be all right. Great. So I'm really happy to be joining this panel today to have a really interesting conversation about what net zero means for Ukraine. And I think the experience of Ukraine obviously is going through an energy transition is extremely challenging when you're in the midst of a war, an invasion. And I think there are probably many lessons that other countries who are in challenging circumstances can take away from what Ukraine is able to accomplish here and has been able to accomplish and is accomplishing. And I'm really interested to hear the perspectives of our colleagues who are have different perspectives on this and living through it. So my name, by the way, is Tim McDonnell. I'm an energy journalist based in Kyiv. I cover the energy transition in different parts of the world, but have been writing a lot about the attacks on energy infrastructure in Ukraine, which, again, we have just seen in the last 24 hours how devastating those can be. There's been yet another escalation. Our friends in Odessa, I think, were out of power for the last 24 hours. And I know in my own apartment in Kyiv, it was out this morning too. So we're seeing, these challenges play out in real time. And I think it's been really impressive to see Ukraine's pavilion at COP for the last several years has always been one of the best ones. And maybe I'm a little bit biased in saying that, but I think it's the truth. And this one is incredible. So I really appreciate all of the work that the delegation has done here to put this together. So anyway, I'll shut up now because mostly my job here is just to ask questions and to listen to the great input from our colleagues joining us. And so I want to start, I just want to make sure I have my notes so I get everyone's name correct. I think we're going to go first to our colleague, Svetlana Kharkovska, who is on is she here in the Zoom? Great. Who's a climate scientist, an Arctic scientist who's been leading Ukraine's delegation to the International Panel on Climate Change, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the scientific group that's carrying out research here. And Dr. Kharkovska, can you hear us? You're with us, right?
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Could you maybe start by just telling us a little bit about your research, and I would love to get some perspective on the climate crisis here. You're obviously seeing this firsthand from working in the Arctic. Tell us a little bit about your research and some of the changes that you are observing there.
Well, first of all, I really thank you that you invite me for this very important panel. And just to make clear on my professional, let's say, experience, I've been in Arctica and in Antarctica as well. So I'm a meteorologist, and I worked when I was a student in many places, and then when I became a scientist, I was on. I worked on Ukrainian Antarctic Station, Academic Vernadsky. So there in 1998, we were witnesses of, let's say, starting of this crisis, in fact. And at that time, I was joking about global warming. Now, actually, it's a really crisis. And my work in last years was very connected with Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where I served as a leading author for Atlas, for regional Atlas, where we analyzed actually changes of climate in different parts of the world and visualized it for many actually stakeholders. They could see visually how climate already changed and how it will go in future. About net zero, it's another part of my story. It seems that it's more or less, how to say, it's next step, let's say, when I was invited to be a member of this technical expert group on a high-level expert group of task force on net zero. And we were examining more than 1,000 of different policies around the globe, mostly in G20 and V20. and where we found that actually world non-state actors start to take seriously crisis and to put their policy on the way to net zero. From my perspective as climate scientist, again, so I work mostly with physical world. So I usually say that physical laws you cannot negotiate. And on my perspective, I see that COP as a conference of parties where mostly politicians actually should negotiate how to go to this net zero. They always need to consult with physical scientists because, well, after all their policies will go to society and society will behave in different way. And after all, this impact on climate system we can measure. So the most important that we should measure this impact. And if it will go over this 1.5 degree, we already see big changes in this physical world. We already see it at 1.2, 0.3, last year 1.5, we all know from WMO report. But how it will be at 1.5 and 2 degrees, we even cannot imagine because we never actually lived in such world. So my appeal to all those who are now at COP, I'm not there physically, but my soul and my thoughts with all people there to push society, to push policymakers toward this net zero, because this is the only way we can survive on this planet. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Could you say a little bit more, Dr. Krakovska, about when we're thinking about the future and climate modeling, what that will mean for Ukraine specifically? What does a 2 degree or 3 degree world of warming look like for Ukraine? What kind of impacts should we be concerned about for Ukraine?
Well, actually, this impact will be comparable with the impact for the whole Europe, let's say. So we have our projections for Ukraine. We have these projections for 1.5 and 2 degrees, and they project for Ukraine, for example, exacerbating of what we already have. So I mean, droughts for actually southeastern part, where we already have these droughts. It's actually more rain, more extreme precipitation for our Carpathian Mountains and our west and north part of Ukraine. And actually, it's a lot of mix actually of these extreme events for central part, because we, again, in Ukraine, we are on this front line between two regions which will experience more drought or more rain. And actually we cannot say now where the line, this another front line will go across Ukraine. And this is again very big challenge for us, because it means that in the central Ukraine, we need to be prepared for both scenarios, in fact. So we need to be prepared for more rain and for less rain. And of course, it's another extreme events like hail of big diameter, which actually for energy infrastructure like solar panels, really very dangerous. It's a gust of wind, which again could be dangerous for wind turbines. So we have these, let's say, projections, and we can give it to energy sector, we can give it for our agricultural sector, we can give it for our actually buildings, for our people who will project our, I don't want to say rebuilding, or even I want to say actually renaissance of Ukraine. We really very hope that we will have our new Ukraine actually after our victory. We all looking in our future, of course, notwithstanding I am now in the office and I don't know which, will it stop now this electricity in my office in Kiev?
Mm-hmm. But one last question. I know you're working in the Antarctic, but if we're thinking about the Arctic, we've seen, I think, some movement by Russia recently to also consolidate its control of that region. And I've heard in some cases cut off access for scientists to be able to study climate change impacts in the Arctic. what are you seeing in terms of Russia's actions in the Arctic, and what kind of a problem does that pose for scientists who are trying to study this region?
Well, of course, it poses a problem for scientists when we need to have this in situ data. Of course, on one meeting, big Arctic summit, actually, one after COVID, one Russian scientist, it was in 2022, actually. She said, we cannot ignore 1/6 of land on the Earth. But in fact, it's not scientific argument, all scientists were just laughing on it. So, I mean, the big argument just to have this big, territory, which unfortunately can impact others, because if they will not manage, not govern this territory in proper way, of course, all planet will have problem, because warming in Arctic really pose problem for many people. But again, science at the moment pretty much advanced. We have our distant methodology of measurement. We have our satellite system, so we can measure, let's say, methane from the satellite. We can actually use other Arctic region from Canada. Again, if we need some in situ measurements in Arctic environment. But of course, well, from my perspective as Ukrainian scientist, I do prefer isolate Russian scientists. They are, they are let their president and their authorities to pose war on my country, in fact. And so this is their responsibility. And we as Ukrainian scientists, we suffer a lot. We don't have now much our young generation, because they prefer to go to the front line and defend our country. At the same time, Russian scientists can do everything in their country and can, continue their scientific work. So it's not fair, of course. It's so that in this case, I guess we can survive without Russian scientists, without Russian science, because it's global problem, and we can actually substitute their measurements in other territories.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Kukovska, for those comments. I wanted to turn to Ingi Johnstone, thank you, from University of Oxford, who's an expert on carbon markets and other, I think, important solutions that we can think about for this net zero pathway. I wondered, Ingi, if you could tell us a little bit about your research, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about where you see a kind of carbon markets fitting into the solution for net zero in a big picture, and then also how a country like Ukraine could think about accessing carbon markets or participating in the carbon market as part of its journey to net zero. Thanks. You can use mine.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the organizers for having me here. I think I'll first start off with, I guess, situating us within the context of this COP, which is a finance COP. Carbon markets can play a role within that, but there are also a variety of other climate finance delivery mechanisms. And it's really critical when we come to this discussion that we remember there is a variety of tools, and we have to always be careful that we're selecting the right tool for the job at hand. And so under the Paris Agreement, there are a variety of articles that actually cover financing. So we have Article 2.1c, which speaks to the transition of the kind of overall financial system in a manner that becomes more Paris aligned. We also have Article 5, which is designed to finance results-based protection of sinks of CO2, so your kind of land-based sector. We have Article 6, which you may have heard discussed a lot at this COP, and which is where the framework kind of rules for the market-based mechanisms will be agreed, and I'll come back to that. We also have Article 9, so that speaks to the broader climate finance obligations. And we also have a number of other provisions, such as Article 10, which deals with technology transfer. And so it's really important, again, that we utilize all these tools in the toolbox when we're thinking about how best to scale climate finance and how best, especially to leverage it for sustainable development and in contexts such as Ukraine as part of a sustainable reconstruction and really true envisioning of the future. So I can speak to Article 6 more specifically. So Article 6 helps support the implementation of nationally determined contributions. That both helps to plug the gap of host buyer countries if they've stopped short of their emission reductions within a given country, and it helps host countries implement their NDCs as well. So for a country in context like Ukraine, there's a real potential to set an ambitious NDC and to really isolate and identify the conditional parts of that and how Article 6 could help plug that gap. And so that particularly can be the case for these kinds of carbon projects that could be applicable, whether it is in terms of financing new energy infrastructure, whether it's through retrofitting buildings and kind of enhancing the sustainability of them as part of the reconstruction. So the raft of potential measures, but what's really critical from a kind of framework perspective is really ensuring that Ukraine has access to the wider toolbox as well. So it doesn't just kind of narrow into carbon markets as a start, because carbon markets can be most effective and are most effective when looking to the specifically additional and specifically kind of carbon oriented projects. Whereas it's really important to kind of build it into a broader strategy, which really identifies the levers of climate finance more broadly, but also the systemic transformations of the economic system overall. And the fact that, for instance, the World Bank, IMF and others have much stronger mandates to invest in climate solutions and to even review normal kind of projects through a climate lens. And so it speaks to this opportunity to kind of address multiple birds with one stone and really look at how to efficiently channel capital inflows in a way that it can maximize the impact of them.
Can you say a little bit more about how we see the sort of guardrails around the carbon market shaping up? I think we've all probably seen the reports in the news media or from researchers about greenwashing in the voluntary carbon market, and there's been some bad actors in this market in the past, or projects that overstated their benefit, that sort of thing. And how do you kind of see, there's a lot of work being done by various groups to improve the conditions there. How do you see those sort of guardrails forming up, and should we feel confident at this point that if we're going to look to carbon markets, that the benefit that we think we're getting is actually the benefit that we're really getting?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, it's a hugely topical issue, and it's one that is hugely fraught because there has been significant controversies associated with the voluntary carbon market and mechanism projects that deliver these kinds of climate outcomes in general. So before we had the Paris Agreement, we had the Kyoto Protocol and the Clean Development Mechanism. And actually, Ukraine was part of some of that crediting. There was a lot of issues as an aggregate in terms of whether or not those systems actually delivered atmospheric impacts. And so in many ways, in the Paris Agreement, we're trying to learn those lessons from the past and redesign a system that does lead to real, additional, and verified project outcomes on the ground. Unfortunately, my view as a researcher is that those lessons have not been learned to the extent that they could have been as implemented in the Article 6 framework. For instance, this very foundational distinction between reductions and removals has been lost. And in large part, a lot of the criticisms of kind of projects that have been out on the voluntary carbon market are much more avoidance based. And this is why it's really important to kind of really isolate and understand what kind of mitigation outcome we're talking about, because then it also affects the kind of guardrails that we need. So for avoided deforestation, you need to be pretty sure that that patch of land was actually under threat from deforestation and that your solution will actually contribute to it. Because in many ways, we have good projects on the ground that need financing, but the carbon market and kind of carbon credits that are being used to kind of offset emissions, whether at the corporate level or the country level through Article 6, we need to be really sure that that does represent an additional outcome. And a study released this week, which aggregated up other assessments that have been peer-reviewed, revealed that 16% of credits actually delivered any kind of emission reduction. So when we're looking at building those kind of credit-based systems into 6.2 and 6.4, and that's what parties are here negotiating, we need to be really sure that these do actually represent emission reductions or removals, and to be really clear in that pathway of utilizing those tools on the way to net zero. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and there's this chance to address those at the domestic level and through robust legislation to really look down that line of integrity and kind of position as a country Ukraine's framework to attune to those to where the market will shift in terms of this higher integrity direction, so that avoiding being locked into some project categories or types that, you know, we're known to have much more greater uncertainties from a carbon markets perspective, and at the same time use those projects that aren't carbon market appropriate projects, use those as the case for other types of financing, so climate financing or other results-based financing. So again, it's really about looking as to where carbon market financing is most appropriate, and that is in those cases that otherwise it would not have been addressed any other way. So nitrous oxide destruction is one of the credits that came best in the additionality assessments, and that's for the fact that there's no kind of economic incentive to do that otherwise. Durable carbon removal is the same. So most of the projects that withdraw carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it, you know, in underground caverns or through materials such as biochar, oftentimes there's not a good reason to do that otherwise, and these are really costly investments. So they do rely on carbon credit revenue to actually come into the world. Whereas things like avoided deforestation, many types of renewable energy are already economic in their own right. And so if you're supplementing carbon market financing there, you're actually displacing them from new and additional projects that can contribute obviously to emissions reductions, but critically also true sustainable development in terms of the jobs and kind of local benefits that they can realize as well.
Great. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that overview, Ingi. And I think a lot to think about in terms of what we need to see to have confidence in this market. To turn to Dr. Amani Malouf, also from Oxford. Many great Oxford colleagues here today. That's great to see. Could you tell us a little bit about your work on waste management, the waste sector, and sort of where you see that fitting into the solution picture here? Do you guys have another microphone down at that end? I thought there was another one, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to. Hello.
Yeah,
It's working. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, so I would like to continue the discussion from my colleague Ingi to highlight more specifically on the waste sector. The waste sector is like one of the sectors that can have like the highest potentials to kind of really reduce on emissions and offset, you know. It's a win-win situation, because in one side you're improving on the management, but also you're like really offsetting emissions. And this is especially when we talk about land disposal. The waste sector is the third largest source of methane emission that come mostly from landfills and dump sites. And here to talk more specifically about Ukraine. So in Ukraine, according to the Ministry of Regional Development, about 10 million tons of waste are being disposed annually. Only a very, very small fraction, like 600K, are being recycled or burned every year. And the rest goes a bit to landfills, and this is like the latest official data. And even before the war on Ukraine, the sustainable waste management also was not properly functionable. So, and to add on the situation, as I learned here from my colleagues, like today there is massive bombing over Ukraine, and similar to the country I'm coming from Lebanon, this situation is even making the situation worse because we don't have proper waste collection. Many of the waste infrastructure is being destroyed. So this is exacerbating the waste management problem and adding additional major sources also of pollution. So here, would like to mention that the in relation to the carbon market. So it is very important as part of the work that we do at the in the Oxford Sustainable Finance Group, where we are mapping waste management facilities in order to identify investable projects and the sources of these. I would not say it's methane pollution, but methane reduction potential projects where you can really invest. And this can happen through the voluntary carbon market and this kind of projects where by identifying the location of these different waste facilities or waste disposal facilities like uncontrolled dump sites, we can bring finance through the private or even financial donors to invest in these uncontrolled managed sites. So under the climate change umbrella, we can bring funding to improve on the management, reduce on the emissions, and also this will help Ukraine in order to find better ways to improve on their infrastructure investment through energy as well, because many of these waste projects you can, through the biogas generated, also generate electricity, and this will help also on the energy crisis.
That's great. I was going to ask actually about bioenergy and sort of methane capture and opportunities there. It's also, I think, from waste, definitely, and also I think importantly for Ukraine from the agriculture sector and cattle and farm waste and that kind of thing. Similar. Can you say a little bit about, you know, for waste, what are we learning about the best way to stand up these energy projects? Like what kind of support is needed to get more of this, you know, but biogas, biomethane, energy kind of capture happening?
Yeah, this is a very important question. So by moving from this uncontrolled form of waste disposal like dump sites, which is mostly contributing to methane, and moving more to a proper form of waste disposal through landfills, or if there is a big biodegradable fraction through biogas and other kind of anaerobic digestion and this kind of treatment where you're capturing methane and you're converting it to energy, you're from one side reducing on the methane emissions, from another side you're generating electricity, which would help with the current energy crisis also in Ukraine and provide alternatives, alternative energy. And this can be done, as I mentioned, through this kind of voluntary carbon market, where the first is to identify where this dump site location is happening now, and second, to estimate how much they're contributing into emissions, and to try to attract, you know, and then now with also what we do at the in our group. So there are improvement also in satellite technology where you can rely on methane satellite data, where you can also identify methane hotspots, and you can use it for better measurement, verification, and monitoring. So it's also a new technology that's still under development, I would say, but it also has a big potential because it can provide better ways for the operators, for the regulators, for also donors to kind of track this methane and then provide better and sustainable and efficient way for improvement in this sector.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Malov. Appreciate those comments. Moving down the line to Dr. Evgenia Kopitsia, also another from Oxford, our friend here. I would love, could you say a little bit about, to turn back to kind of the energy sector and energy security for Ukraine? And, you know, we're obviously facing this massive power generation deficit because of Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. What's the way forward to kind of rebuild that in a cleaner way? And how do you sort of balance between the immediate needs of energy security versus
Thanks a lot for such a comprehensive question and very up-to-date one. And thank you very much for amazing Oxford colleagues that invested their research into the development and updating of Ukraine's future. But today I would not be talking about the future because I asked this question a couple of times to different experts. And actually, it's not about the future, it's about the present. It should have been about the past. but we're dealing with it now. So I think there should be no compromise between long term and short term. I think that, of course, priorities are priorities, that we have to deal with the urgent reconstruction needs because we are reconstruction and rebuilding on the go, but we can't afford, and Ukraine actually is keeping it in mind. And like we can see it from the advancement of our legislation, we are creating the policy frameworks, we are creating the legislation that is attracting investment into the renewable-based projects. We have adopted the climate framework law this year, and that is creating the legal basis for the further advancement of the climate agenda in Ukraine. While we also will always will have this kind of, you know, like idealistic vision, and we definitely could be criticized for dreaming big while dealing with the power outrages for up to 17 hours per day. But statistics are statistics. Actually, I wanted to give you the boring numbers, but now I closed my laptop just because it's amazing and remarkable visual that you can see with the solar power panel that is displayed over there. So this was a solar power panel that was installed in Mykolaiv region. It was operating, it was hit by the Russian drone, and then it was replaced. Do you know how much it takes to replace the solar power panel? Any ideas? Okay, 3 days, 10 days, 3 hours, 3 months. Okay, 3 hours, 3 hours. You can replace the solar power panel within 3 hours, creating the resilient energy system. So, and when you hear that we shouldn't dream big, we are not dreaming, we're doing. And I think Ukraine is the great case study while being on the front lines, in all of the senses. We are on the front lines of the advancement, green and clean energy transition. And you can see it from the situation from the cities like Kharkiv, my native city. The roads are being destroyed and then they are renovated the next morning. And we could see it like with the growth of the solar power panels installed on the domestic like facilities all around Ukraine. And it's interesting enough that when we're talking about the energy transition, it's as well not something that lots of countries feel being forced to, but we want it. And it was not the case before full Russian scale invasion, but it had the war to happen to mobilize not only international community to understand what energy security means, but as well, like we could see like the awareness, the growing awareness about the local, like about the Ukrainian population, how important it is to be resilient and to invest into net zero because it gives you independence. Like you have the solar power panel installed in your balcony in the block of the apartments, and it sounds strange and sometimes funny, but this gives you resilience and independence. And if you take the example of the simple Ukrainian household and imply it like to the country, this is what we all should be doing. Like, let's install more power panels. Let's develop more renewable-based infrastructure, and we would be resilient. We would be independent. We would be self-sufficient, and we don't need to rely on the fossil fuel industry. We don't need. We could see it like it takes 3 hours to replace the solar power panel, but it can take 3 years to rebuild the old power plant.
Can you expand on that point a little bit at the end? That's what I was going to ask, actually. Where do you see fossil fuels fitting into the recovery effort, if at all? I mean, I know DTEC is working to rebuild some of these coal plants. USAID and other Western allies of Ukraine have been kind of helping set up some gas peaker plants and kind of small gas plants, that sort of solution. Do we need any of that in the short term, or is that part of the mix, or is all of that kind of taking us in the wrong direction? I mean, how do you kind of see that part of the solution?
At the urgency solution, we can't avoid it. We can't escape it, unfortunately, because, well, people need their homes to be heated and they need to have electricity. And this is what we saw from the research, that this year we had much more diesel generators and gas turbines imported into Ukraine than renewables and then the solar power panels, but this is because it was the critical response. But we should keep in mind, and we do keep it in mind, and I think that we can see that the ambition is here, like overall in this pavilion and every single discussion during this COP was that we, again, we're not dreaming big, but we're doing it now. Short term, we need our homes to be heated, but we are not looking into it at the solution for the next winter, hopefully. So yes, there is always this kind of balance, and we can't foresee what next infrastructural attacks would come from Russia. Of course, we need more defense of our critical facilities, but again, coming back, like talking net zero and talking renewable based and optimistic, most of like critical facilities, water power stations, hospitals, they were equipped with the solar power panels that is enough to provide, for example, the operational unit in the hospital running for like 3 hours. So even if there is the power cut, we still like would have the possibility to give critical services to the people, and this is the most important. But again, it's not about short term. We had to have it like this winter. Sometimes we see like that it should be the gas perceived like as a transitional fuel, but transitional, it doesn't mean long term. And I think like with all of us, the discussions in this pavilion, we would not allow it to be long term.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Let's go now to our final guest, Victoria, UNDP, UN Development Program. And can you say a little bit, Victoria, about what some lessons from UN? I mean, UNDP has a lot of experience working all over the world on energy transition issues, kind of development more broadly, oftentimes in countries that are very challenged because of conflict or because of poverty or other issues. I mean, what can you bring from your experience working in those other contexts that might be helpful for Ukraine's transition and recovery here?
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question and for the inspirational also inputs from the panelists. Well, first I was thinking of where to start from, because we today speak a lot about Ukraine's milestones in the last few months, actually, in adopting framework climate law, the LT-LEDs, the long-term low emission development strategy discussion started today, and we're looking forward to the next year for the next NDC to be developed, and it's all during the war. So I think we don't need any more obligations, external obligations to prove ourselves that we need those strategies. So the word commitment is commitment to ourselves. These documents, these strategies became our ownership. So that is where actually, so when the NDC or the long-term low emission development strategy becomes face of country's investment plan, the face of country's development plan, it integrates with other sectors, other policies. And this is where actually international organization development partners can bring in expertise to make sure that this ownership really has buy-in from business, from partners. It's high quality, it's clear in text, it's clear in data, and it brings more expertise also from other regions, other sectors, and yeah, integrating such important issues also like just transition, gender equality, and like leaving no one behind about all of this. So UNDP globally this year launched in response to Secretary General's call, a so-called Climate Promise initiative. First of all, is to mobilize the whole UN system and leverage its resources with one channel in offering government support under NDC development and NDC implementation. So basically UNDP's role here is to coordinate the whole UN system inputs and communicate those inputs to the governments. So the government can see what the whole system offers and see the gap, and also with support of UNDP and other partners like NDC partnership, mobilize additional resources and expertise to implement this stuff. But what is that behind all of this stuff when I say in this word? When the country develops NDC or develops the alternate strategy or the framework climate law, the work is just to begin. The whole life starts with the implementation of all these documents, and it's bylaws. It's a lot of work on ground. So if that is NDC, it's integrating all of these targets into implementation in transport sector, energy sector, waste management sector. And when we speak about new commitments of Ukraine, it's also commitments related to more ambitious climate targets, more ambitious emissions reduction, adaptation in all of these sectors. So that recovery that is crossed lines, crossing all of the contributions of Ukraine is really ready to the climate impacts that Ukraine is also going to face, like all the rest part of the world. So the new roads which are being constructed with the help of scientists and academic inputs, so the new standards can really adapt and be written in the terms that the new construction materials are made in the way that they are stable and resilient to new changes in temperature rises or weather hazards. So UNDP is really proud to support Ukraine on this path. So today UNDP is supporting the government with the LTLADs. In the past and also in my past career in UNDP, we also were proud to support Ukraine with the national adaptation strategy development and deployment of micromobility transport. And this is also kind of individual resilience, being less dependent from public transport or road emissions. So we will stand there each time when Ukraine commits, being that partner of trust, being that partner that can bring expertise, leverage resources, and leverage additional partners of the whole UN family.
That's great. Thank you so much. Could you say a little bit more about the finance piece of this? I mean, this is a climate finance COP. That's what we're mostly here talking about in Baku. And I think, you know, there's a lot of different ideas about how to mobilize more climate finance. I'm interested, you know, in UNDP's experience in attracting climate finance to you know, these kinds of energy transition projects. Is there something that, you know, that Ukraine might be doing more to get that kind of support? I mean, is there, I guess another way of asking this question, you know, is there a bigger role for international climate finance to help with Ukraine's recovery and energy transition?
Yes, thank you for that question. Basically, UNDP does and can do more on that side. First of all, if you get back to NDCs, so if consider national determined contributions as investment phase or like the plan of the country to develop. So here UNDP can intervene with supporting developing bankable projects, projects that are ready to be taken by the international banks and be supported by the private sector. So there are plenty of examples also in the region when UNDP developed a solid NDC investment plan or NDC investment strategy with real concept notes, feasible for partners and investors to come in and actually understand when they get the resources back. On the other side, also UNDP supports Ukraine with the Article 6 implementation and the roadmap for introducing Article 6 measures in Ukraine. So actually, this is another side of the international finance to help Ukraine more and with their first on one side with the climate commitments, and on the other side, making sure that business inside the country is interested in reducing the emissions and trading those emissions with other countries. So these are a few examples, and basically, yeah, they're leveraging more resources, also like talking constantly with the partners, with the governments, and basically this climate promise initiative, which I mentioned, will also serve as the resource mobilization plan for country. with having like the clear picture of what country needs and what other are already supporting, because sometimes one support is not visible. We always have a different situation with country when one agency does one thing, another agency does another thing, with lots of experience in miscommunication between one or another, or when one ministry doesn't know what another ministry does. And that's the issue. And we try at least to combine efforts of one UN family into one channel and make sure that we do not overlap and we offer it as a one joint work plan.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jenny, can I ask you one more? To go back to this kind of energy transition question, it's sort of related to this climate finance question I was asking before. What more support does Ukraine need, I guess, from the outside, from allies or development banks, climate finance, that's sort of needed to help make this transition happen? Because I know when you speak to renewable energy project developers in Ukraine, or I've had this conversation with the CSO of DTEC this week, it's access to finance is the big thing. It is a major obstacle for the wind farms that they're trying to build, or for any large renewable project. It's difficult to attract international investment because people are concerned about conflict risk and the security of the assets. What else is needed to kind of get more money flowing into this sector, or to help kind of close that finance gap for Ukraine?
Yeah, first and foremost, we need all the possible money coming in Ukraine because Ukraine's economy is devastated, and we had the drop in Ukraine's GDP in 2022 up to 30%, and it got a little bit better, but of course we can't do this alone. So while showing resilience and resistance, we can't do this alone. And actually, it's always about the financing. But again, it's not only about Ukraine, it's about any country in the world. Any single country needs more investments coming into the clean and green energy transition. And yes, in Ukraine, it just we see that the constraints, first and foremost, just because we have this war and risk, the absence of the war insurance, which we are calling for, and hopefully we would try to elaborate it by leveraging our international networks and partners. For example, within Energy Security Marshall Plan, one of the initiatives that were started and is now taking place in Ukraine, we are looking into the development of policy frameworks that would mobilize resources from United States, UK, Australia, supposedly, to implement the policies that would create the favorable conditions for the investments to come to Ukraine, despite the bank, the insurance provided by the banks, this war insurance. So it's kind of going on, the process is going on. And well, the financing, as far as where it comes, one thing that I would, and I really was willing to see within UNFOCCC, is that there is a special financial mechanism flowing into the countries that are in the conflict affected or fragile regions. And we, unfortunately, as Ukraine, we can't leverage this because we are not with the Annex II country, we're not the developing country. And this is one of the bottlenecks of the UNFOCCC regime, despite the fact that our economy now would go a little bit further to the economy of the developing countries. So it should be the special allocated mechanisms that would enable the financing prioritized to the countries that are in the fragile and conflict affected zone. So this is what I personally would like to see from the UNFOCCC. But, in this case, if I'm very much optimistic about Ukraine and what Ukraine can do, I'm a little bit pessimistic on the international cooperation, and how fast, these advancements can be taken within UNFOCCC. But we would really like to see it again, not only as Ukraine, but at other countries that are suffering from the war and can be considered at the fragile states.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and important point. Should be definitely taken into consideration here with that kind of war context. Getting special access to finance, I think, is a really good point. Okay, we have a few minutes left in case there's anyone from the audience that had a question. No. Okay. Great. Well, in that case, I just wanted to thank all of our panelists for your participation and all of these really interesting thoughts. So thank you so much. And it's a lot to keep working on here, obviously. So can you all join me in thanking our panelists, and hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you.